6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. Pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
Prepare yourself for a world of science. This is Science.
Good morning, everybody. Brand spanking new episode of the Science Night in the morning. And I'm your host, Conley Razor. And I have on the horn with me Dr. Sean Graham, who is calling in all the way from down under. Sean, what's up, man?
Hey, Conley, what's going on? What's going on, all you Science Nights fans? Sorry, we've been on a bit of a hiatus lately, but it's good to be back.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, you're in the midst, I guess, what did you call it, in the midst, or in the process of actually writing about North American deserts. That's our topic today. We're going to deep dive into it, but we're also going to deep dive into the writing process too. You're like publishing books like right and left here. What's up with that? That's cool.
I'm trying. Yeah. I feel like right now the process of publishing is the only thing slowing me down. I write pretty fast. I've got one, kind of always have one in the can, one in the process of being published, and then I'm working on a new one as we speak. And so I really enjoy writing. And so I know a lot of people find it really hard and difficult. And to me, it's just a lot of fun. So yeah, I can write all the time, and I'm in the middle of one. And I didn't really want to call in to just talk about my book and writing and as like a giant advertisement.
No.
I thought we could talk about the North American deserts, and especially because I'm in the middle of writing that one right now, a book about the North American deserts. And so I feel like I could just talk about the North American deserts for weeks and weeks at a time. So it'd be a super easy, fun show to talk about.
Yeah, and informative. And I'm looking forward to getting into that topic. And it kind of gives me a bucket list. I'm going to be taking notes during this episode because I want to know where I want to go visit. I love the desert. We live here in Alpine because we love the desert. And to know about more than just the ones we're familiar with, and also maybe some, you'll learn today a few things you didn't know about this area too. But before we get into that, Dr. Sean Graham, I got to ask, how much more different do you think? And you've been under the tutelage of many brilliant professors throughout your academic career, I'm sure. But my question is, how much more different would it be if you didn't have the internet to write?
Oh yeah, that's great, Conley, because I've been, especially where I'm at right now, because I fled the United States. I'm in Australia now, and so I brought a big portion of my library with me. All my desert books are here, but I am actually. It's amazing how isolated I am from the rest of the stuff that I need. And so, I always knocked Sol Ross's library when I was there because it's so puny. But man, their desert collection is actually really freaking good. And there's a bunch of stuff that I need from that library right now that I can't get. And honestly, I can't get them anywhere in this country.
In interlibrary loan, man.
No, there is no such thing. They've got not that reaches that far.
I've sent one to China before.
I'm not affiliated with the university here.
Oh yeah,
and that's and like you can't just go to the public library down the street and expect them to send you some book. And imagine it being from Australia. What would they need a book about the Arizona deserts for?
Right.
So they've got a national library here in Canberra, in the capital, that I assume is like the Library of Congress. Where they've got everything.
Yeah.
And I looked in their catalog, and they've actually got a couple of things that I need, but the whole country's shut down right now, and they don't do interlibrary loan to just, Dubbo public library. So I'm looking at either just buying that book, like an old copy of that book on Amazon, and then having it shipped here for a cool $100 each.
Whoa.
Because the shipping's so expensive.
Yeah.
Or I'm looking at just not not having all the references that I probably should have in my book. So yeah, I'm really struggling with that right now. But to your point, I can get a lot off the internet, and that's amazing, especially old stuff. Like what I'm working on right now is focusing on super old references that are like in the public domain, and that stuff's amazing stuff. Travelers from the 1820s, 18 like you know these people who first explored the deserts. That stuff's freely available. I don't like to read stuff online. It's hard for me. I'd rather have the hard copy. But if there's no other choice, then you can get, Zebulon Pike explored, Colorado and New Mexico and these places like that, right on the heels of Lewis and Clark, just like a decade later. And he saw many of these places, as an American. I mean, there were Spanish travelers before that, and that kind of thing. But some of these old accounts are freely available, and they're really well written. Zebulon Pike was a literate dude, and he could write well, and it's just amazing to see and read about these places from some of those, first explorers. And you can get all that stuff online for free as PDFs. It's just great stuff.
Well, the wonders of the interwebs is making your life a lot easier, all of our lives easier, and a little bit more hectic if you think about it. But that's interesting. So, as an ancestral academic, you would literally devote all your time in the library, probably. Instead of just
I'm pretty old school
and cruising online.
Well, so you were asking me earlier, kind of like you'd like to get into the process of how I write, and I can tell you it's very, very simple. I read and then I write. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I gobble up everything. I read a ton of stuff about whatever whatever my chapter is going to be about. I might spend months reading everything I can find, and then I just let it kind of distill in my brain, and then I sit down and write.
Do you structure the book? Is there an outline before, like preemptively, before you even start reading? Do you kind of set out what your whole thesis is? Do you know your thesis? Or do you find that at the end? You kind of have a loose one right now, and then at the end you have your thesis.
Well, I wouldn't say there's a thesis. It's just the North American deserts is the topic.
Right.
And so, how do you talk about that topic? And and generally, kind of, what's the basic structure? I've got had all that at the very beginning. I kind of thought of it, and I was like, yeah, that would work. And it lends itself for a pretty easy structure, because it's like, introduction, you just talk about deserts and what kind of climatic features and global climate factors cause deserts. That's the introduction. Boom. And then you talk about like landforms, desert landforms. How do they form? What do we know about that? So like the basic, what we'd call abiotic factors, the non-biological things that influence deserts. And then you talk about plants and animals, their adaptations to the desert. And then you're off to the races. The next several chapters talk about each desert individually. And then that's where I'm at right now. I'm kind of in the home stretch. I'm going to be done with that soon. And then I've got a chapter in mind about like how humans interact with the desert, Native Americans. And then a chapter to end it all about how modern humans are affecting the desert, conservation, that kind of thing.
Yeah, conservation, preservation. Let's deep dive. Let's deep dive into this topic, North American deserts. But before, so we're going to get there. Let's start off with this question. There is something common to all deserts, and that, to my knowledge, is the scarcity of water. Is that correct?
That's pretty much what it all comes down to. That's the best way to define a desert. And it's funny, you can get into like all these weird ways that like geographers and ecologists and other people will define a desert. Hey, I'll give you a good example. You'll hear some people talk about what's the world's largest desert. That's a trivia question.
Sahara.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. The Sahara is about the size of the United States as the lower 48, and it's got huge sections that are way more dry than the driest place in North America. Like half of the Sahara is as arid as Death Valley. Half of it.
Wow. Geez.
So half of the lower 48. But then you'll hear some people say, no, the largest desert in the world is Antarctica.
Oh, God.
And it's like, because Antarctica receives no rainfall.
Right.
But that's not the same thing, though, because it does receive precipitation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you get into trouble with some of these definitions. And that's where, this other definition of a desert is where like evaporation exceeds rainfall
Right.
by a
Okay.
large degree. And
Yeah.
that's what
Humidity.
you're getting at. It's a dryness, it's aridity. And where evaporation exceeds rainfall, that's where you have what most people in their mind have pictured as a desert, where it's like, very little plant growth, can be hot, can be cold in the wintertime. But as long as evaporation exceeds rainfall, you're going to end up with this thing that most people think of as desert. And that's where the Antarctic gets disqualified, because the sun shines so little in Antarctica, there's basically never any evaporation. That's why, the snow that can be there, it's true, might have fallen 20,000 years ago to make the ice pack in Antarctica, and it still hasn't evaporated. It hasn't gone anywhere because the sun just never shines there. It can't evaporate anything. It's a different place, a very different place than what most people think of as desert. You could just as easily define parts of the ocean as a desert, but using that same construct that you would define in Antarctica. Because there's huge areas of the subtropics of the ocean where it hardly ever rains. They're adjacent to the deserts. They're just as much of a desert, but it's the ocean.
Yeah.
So it's like, come on, we're not going to call the subtropical oceans deserts because it doesn't rain there. It's stupid.
Yeah.
So you go with this other definition, and you end up with a good common sense definition. And our deserts in North America do fit that definition. Our deserts receive a little bit more rainfall than a lot of the places in the old world, like Africa. The Eurasian deserts are considerably more dry than ours. And so old world geographers often kind of laugh at what we call a desert in North America. There's this hilarious anecdote by an Egyptian ecologist who visited North America, who visited Tucson. And he's like, this is not a desert. This is a botanical garden you're talking about here. It's nothing like the Sahara. But, you got to draw the line somewhere. And of course, within that definition of a desert, receiving about 10 inches of rain or less a year, evaporation exceeding rainfall, you're going to have some variation there. And we just North American deserts happen to be on the upper end of that scale, where it's super dry, but it does support vegetation. Australia's deserts are the same way. There's hardly any place in Australia where there's not some vegetation, because it does rain enough to support vegetation. We do have a few places that are hyper arid, where very little vegetation grows. Death Valley, the Gran Desierto is a huge sand dune complex in northern Sonora. These are the driest deserts we have, and they're formidable, really dry deserts that are similar in many respects to those old world deserts. We got a good variety. We got kind of both ends of the scale. We got some places like Tucson, the giant saguaro forests that are very nearly outside of what most people would define as a desert. I mean, if you've got trees growing in your desert, as weird as they are, the giant saguaro is a tree. It's a tree cactus. You got some other trees, palo verdes. I mean, if you got trees growing in your desert, you really need to wonder about whether or not you've misclassified this place. It's too lush, maybe. It's right on the edge. That does, it's not its fault. It's on the edge of our human definition of what a desert is. It just makes it more interesting, I think.
Sure. Well, okay. So before we start, I think we'll wait until after the break to start the bucket list of like where to go and like what makes these different deserts in North America unique.
Good idea.
We have we have about 7 minutes left in the segment. One thing I'd like you to touch on, though, is that the flora and fauna in these deserts, they're so unique because these animals they have to find creative ways to survive. Same with the plants. They have to find creative, and we've talked before about nursing plants, and there's a lot of different really interesting cactus in these deserts. And there's a lot of really interesting animals. Can you touch on Why is that? Why are these animals not only very attracted to this type of climate and lifestyle? It's not like they can't migrate and go somewhere else, but they live there. That's their home, but it's changed their evolution in a lot of ways too. The plants and animals.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's you've nailed one of the things I love most about the desert is that the adaptations of the plants and animals are kind of obvious what they're about. They're not, they're overt, they're very honest.
Yeah. Right.
Because like in other places, the tropical rainforest, deciduous forests, you name it, grasslands, adaptations of plants and animals might be subtle. They might be that, the big deciding factors of what is going to live in a grassland or in a forest might be interactions with other plants and animals, right?
Mhm.
That might be
Yeah.
what's driving things. So you might have all kinds of really cool things like camouflage to match grass stems. Who knows? But in the desert, it's less about interactions between animals and plants, and it all comes down to water, like you said.
Mhm.
And so almost every adaptation you find in the desert, there are plenty of other kinds, but you're going to find these super overt adaptations to reduce water loss, to conserve water, that are just really overt and really easy for anybody to understand. So it's a perfect place to take like students or children to go and talk about these kinds of things because it's super obvious. Like you go up and you go, this cactus, 80% of its tissues are water storage tissues.
Right.
And so this, a camel's hump doesn't actually have water in it. That's a myth, perpetuated by Looney Tunes cartoons. But the cactus, being a reservoir for water, it's not quite like the cartoon where you can just cut it open and drink out of it. But that water storage tissue truly is. That's what it's about. That cactus can kind of draw on that stored water for months. And then they've got these shallow root systems that as soon as it rains, they can
Right,
sop
real
it back
shallow.
up and they can expand and then refill their supply. And it's just so cool that it's just sitting right in front of you there. You can even watch them shrivel up. Some of the cacti in the Southwest, I'm thinking of one called beaver tail cactus that lives mostly in the Mohave Desert. And it shrivels up. It looks like kind of a a shriveled up scrotum. I can't think of a better way to describe it. But it shrivels up, and so you can almost tell how long it's been since it rained based on how scrotal your beaver tail cactus looks.
Beaver tail cactus. You heard it here first, everybody. Go and just imagine away. But
Yep.
But you brought up something interesting. So we have cottonwoods out here. And
Yeah.
cottonwoods they love the water. They want more
Yeah,
water. So would you say that cottonwoods, just first off, being here, present in the desert, mainly around abundant water sources, right? Rivers, lakes, and stuff.
Yeah.
Versus like a resurrection plant, okay?
Yeah.
That really it is designed to conserve.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And maximize every single molecule in that drop of water it might receive, which is more efficient and evolved, really. Like, would you say?
That's a good question. Yeah, so cottonwoods kind of are breaking the rules, and you can really think of a cottonwood more as an oasis species than a true desert species.
Oh, okay.
They do have one adaptation that kind of suits them for that role in our area, and that's this huge deep taproot that they have. So they're what you call a phreatophyte, which is one of these sweet, awesome botanical technical terms for a plant with a super deep taproot that can reach super far down to the water table. And so they can, as long as there's some moisture in these old arroyos or around a water source, they're really good at efficiently getting that water from that little oasis to the exclusion of everything else. So they're good competitors for that water. They got that deep taproot, and if anything else is growing there with them, the cottonwood will get it. But besides that, they're wasting water. They got all those big leaves. They're just sitting there. They can cool themselves by evaporating the leaves. So they're just amazing at living. But try growing a cottonwood anywhere outside of an oasis, and it's doomed. Whereas your resurrection plant can grow on the dry face of a limestone rock.
Right. Exactly.
Right? And just restore its body functions as soon as it rains, and then die back. Nearly, it truly enters a state of suspended animation, like
Wow.
science fiction. It just dries up, and it should be dead. All of its life functions have ceased, but if you pour water on it, it grows back. Those are really cool adaptations. It's a neat one that we have locally that's kind of endemic to the Chihuahuan Desert, those resurrection plants.
Hmm.
So you you really nailed something there, Conley. You kind of hit two sides of the coin. You can be this water user,
Yeah.
a water exploiter, and as long
Right.
as you can find water, a cottonwood can grow, and they do really good in that kind of situation. Or you can be this like super, savvy, sort of austere plant that can just stay dry for a long time and do it that way. You can't. There's very few plants that can kind of do both.
Right.
You kind of
Yeah.
have to be one or the other. And
Mm.
the analogy I use is like, a four-wheel drive vehicle is great in the desert. You often need one. You need to lower your tire pressure if you're driving on sand dunes. But you know what? Terrible if you're trying to drive across the country on
Sure.
a interstate highway.
Yeah.
You're going to waste gas mileage. That tire pressure could come. You could wreck your tires that way. So you can't do both. You can't have the Acura sedan that might have good gas mileage and drive you across the country on interstate highways real well, and you can't be a four-wheel drive truck, a dune buggy at the same time. And that's what these desert plants, don't think of them as necessarily perfectly adapted to their environment, but they've just made that trade-off where they've given up the lifestyle of normal plants that might live in a meadow or a forest to be able to survive in the desert.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, so there's a real dichotomy right there. There's a big difference, and I
Mhm.
guess it's the resources available. So maybe the absence. That's what makes these deserts. We're about to go to a break, but that's what makes all these deserts really unique. Is that adaptive type lifestyle that they are constantly on the edge of death, almost it seems, and they've
Yeah.
adapted so well that they become these interesting and unique species, which is so cool. I love it. So after the break, we're gonna get our notebook out, and we're gonna start checking off
The
some
bucket
cool,
list.
the bucket list of North American deserts. Is that sound okay with you, Dr. Sean
I
Graham?
can't wait. This is such a good idea, and I can't wait to reveal the places people should see.
All right, we'll see you right after the break. Don't touch that dial. It's Conley and Sean here. Science Night in the Morning. All right, we're back. Dr. Sean Graham, I hope you have your notebook ready. And not only you, but I know our listeners are going to be taking notes during this segment. And I know I will. I got my sheet of paper right here. You can hear that. And I got my pen.
Notebook. Get your notebook and your Rand McNally atlas, and get ready with some pins. You're going to push some pins on some maps.
All right, man. Dude, I'm gonna wrap some yarn across every single pin
There
and
you go.
connect them. So we're gonna get real here. So, all right, let's start from the East Coast, or do you want to start from the West Coast? Which one?
I think the East Coast, like we can start, if you start from the East Coast, you're basically starting where our listening audience is. So you drive, if you're driving from New Orleans and you're trying to get to the desert, the first desert you're going to see is the Chihuahuan Desert. And that's in our neck of the woods. As soon as you cross the Pecos River, basically, you'll notice the changes in the vegetation that you might see, out near Del Rio. You're going to see a lot of shrubs and cactus long before you get to the Pecos River. But once you cross the Pecos, you're going to see that your shrubs and cacti become widely spaced with a lot of bare ground between them. And
Mm.
then you're really at an area where climatically you're getting it maybe only 10 inches of rain a year. And you're in the Chihuahuan Desert, you're going to see all of the all-star plants that most of our listeners are familiar with: lechuguilla, sotol, lots of prickly pear cactus. If you're really good, you can get on your hands and knees and crawl and find your tiny little, peyote, those tiny little cacti. Well, that's the one thing that's kind of cool about the Chihuahuan Desert. It's subtle. A lot of people don't like the Chihuahuan Desert. They think it's boring because they can't see the true diversity that is here. But it is the most diverse North American desert. It's more diverse than the Sonoran Desert in Arizona that everybody kind of talks so much about. And a lot of the diversity is these tiny little cacti species that are really hard to find. And there's just tons of them, dozens and dozens of tiny cacti like peyote that you have to kind of train yourself to look at. But the place in the Chihuahuan Desert I'm going to recommend everybody go, obviously, the place that everyone goes is Big Bend National Park, and everybody's been there. And it is amazing. But I'm going to recommend you get some bravery, fill up the gas tank, get your passport ready, and cross the river. And you don't have to go far. But if you can make it to the Maderas del Carmen conservation area just south of the border on the other side of the river from Big Bend, you'll see that the Chihuahuan Desert really starts to achieve an amazing grandeur when you get into Mexico. You know, only about 1/4 of the Chihuahuan Desert is north of the Rio Grande. The rest of it is in Mexico. Another reason why a lot of people think it's boring is because the Chihuahuan Desert doesn't have as many of these huge charismatic plants like the giant saguaro or the Joshua tree, which typify some of these other deserts. But south of the border, it does. And, you know, this this yucca that we have that grows on our campus at Sil Ross and along the highways in West Texas, this huge tree yucca called giant dagger, pardon me, is really common south of the border. And it grows in huge forests like the Joshua trees just over the border in Mexico. And so if you drive, it takes you forever to get there. But if you're want to be super intrepid, get some friends together and go down to Mexico, south of the border, you will see some pretty astonishing desert environments, and they're not that far away. It just takes a long time to get there, but distance-wise, it's very close.
Wow. So, okay.
So that's your first stop.
That's our first stop. We got our passport. We got plenty of water, a lot of water. Got to have a lot of water.
A lot of water, extra fuel. Like we were
fuel.
talking about, the trade-off, desert traveling requires a lot of fuel. So take extra fuel, take extra water, and go down and see the giant dagger forests. And then get back in your car, cross back over our side of the border.
From where?
If you're down there, you could cross back in Presidio, or you could go up to Juarez and cross there, whatever you want to do. But you want to start heading west and get out of Texas, and you'll drive all the way across New Mexico until you get Arizona, and then you'll pick up the next North American desert, which would be the Sonoran Desert. And as soon as you get to the Tucson area, you'll start seeing your giant saguaro cactus.
There it is.
This 60-foot tall giant cacti that are just unbelievably amazing. A lot of the diversity that is in the Sonoran Desert, and there are places where the Sonoran Desert does beat the Chihuahuan. And one of the ones you can just think of right away is the Sonoran Desert has more birds than the Chihuahuan. And the reason for that is, boom, right there, that cactus. It's because it's a tree. Giant dagger is also a tree, but it doesn't actually, the number of birds breeding in giant dagger yucca in the Chihuahuan Desert hasn't really been studied. There's a lot of birds that will nest in it and carve out holes in it and nest inside of it. But we know how many species are associated with the giant saguaro. There's 2 woodpecker species that carve holes in the giant saguaro. And other birds use their old holes for nesting. Other birds nest on top of the cactus and in little nooks and crannies of the cactus. And so just like that, because you have the addition of that unique and very iconic species of cactus and many other trees as well, the Sonoran Desert immediately has at least a good, depending on the site you visit, maybe an additional 8 to 10 species of birds nesting there than you would have in the Chihuahuan Desert. And so in that respect, it's got us on that because it's got this amazing cactus, many other species, a lot of really cool reptiles and amphibians. The Gila monster, the venomous lizard is there.
It's there?
It's there. It's pretty much only there. I mean, the Gila monsters range extends out from the Sonoran Desert a little bit into the Mohave, but its center of distribution is the Sonoran Desert in Arizona and Sonora, Mexico.
Wow.
And
Okay.
a lot of many unique species, very cool. And it's one of these things where you go there and it definitely has a distinctive vibe
Yeah.
compared to what you're used to with the Chihuahuan Desert. You're like, this place is different. It's got a lot of unique things going on.
Yeah, and Arizona
So
roads are terrible too.
yeah, so to see the Sonoran Desert, it's one of these deserts that's super accessible. Because Tucson, it's a decent sized town, nice town, and it's surrounded by this desert. The Saguaro National Park, super easy to visit, and there's two. It's one of these interesting parks where there's two districts. There's one on the east side of town, one on the west side of town, and so you can visit that national park, go hiking, see all that stuff, and it's super accessible. You can, those woodpeckers that you see nesting in the giant saguaro. If you go pretty much any time of year, you're guaranteed to see them popping in and out of those holes. It's really great.
Cool. Cool.
So where are we?
So
Where are we
we're
going
we're in
next?
Arizona now.
So yeah, we're in Arizona.
I got my
We
bumper
kicked off-
stickers. I got a magnet for my refrigerator.
There you go. There's lots of fun, kind of goofy stuff to see in Arizona too. Along the way you'll see the "What is it?" billboards. I think.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I saw plenty of those when I was bumping on those terrible roads they have. But.
Yeah, there's some good stuff like that to see. It's corny things.
Oh yeah, and there's always a pointer, like a finger pointing to take this random road like into the middle of nowhere to see like this dead carcass like that has been mummified, and you're like, what?
That's it. That's the "What is it?" It's a mummified thing.
Yeah,
I think that thing is turned up on our shows before.
I think so. Spirit Eye Cave, it probably came out of. But
yeah, that's right. That's right. So if you're in Arizona, I would highly recommend, if you've never gone, to drive north from Tucson and go to the Grand Canyon.
There you go.
The Grand Canyon is really cool, and if you feel up to it, so the Grand Canyon is this really interesting. You might have heard of the way that climate and elevation affects vegetation, and like if you go up a mountain, at the base of the mountain you can be like in the low desert, and at the top of the mountain it can be like Arctic tundra, and a walk up a mountain, like a kilometer up a mountain, is like walking 10,000 kilometers to the north in Canada. Not 10,000, 1,000 kilometers. There's interesting elevational changes in vegetation. And in the Grand Canyon, that's all inverted, where at the top, you're kind of in this pinyon juniper forest, the semi-arid woodland type. And as you walk down the canyon, you walk down into the desert. And in the Grand Canyon, it's almost like you have two deserts stacked on top of each other. The Great Basin Desert is the desert that kind of starts in that area and extends north. And it's our North America's only cold desert, what they call a desert where most of the precipitation falls during the winter. And it's actually mostly snow. That's most of the precipitation the Great Basin Desert receives. And that desert extends from, northern Arizona up into Nevada, Utah, southeastern Oregon. And it's a very kind of almost, if anybody calls the Chihuahuan Desert boring, then they've got nothing on the Great Basin Desert, because the Great Basin Desert is truly a very simple desert type. It's got just a handful of shrubs that dominate, mostly sagebrush. They call it the sagebrush ocean. And for miles and miles and miles, you'll see nothing but sagebrush. And in some ways, it's weird and it's boring that way, but it's also kind of cool because it's got this kind of somber, venerable appearance. And in the Four Corners states, the Great Basin Desert truly reaches this kind of beautiful landscape, because you have all of the canyon country, and all of those amazing rock features of the Four Corners are converging with this simple vegetation type to give you these classic, amazing American landscapes.
Wow.
And so if you walk down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, it gets to be a hot desert at the bottom. You don't get any snow down there, and it's more or less kind of a Mojave Desert down at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So you get one on top of the other. You start at the top with woodland, you go down into the Great Basin, cold desert, and then whenever you get to the very bottom, you're in more or less this kind of Mojave Desert scrub. You can get creosote down at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, even Joshua trees in some areas. But if you really want to see it, like the best place to see the Great Basin Desert, is that canyon country. I highly recommend Canyonlands National Park for a really amazing visual scenic experience.
Say that national park again.
Canyonlands.
Canyonlands. How far north are we from the Grand Canyon here?
So it would be about a day's drive to go from the Grand Canyon. You would drive across Monument Valley.
Oh man! And are you talking about Zion? You're skipping Zion?
Zion is in the area. You'd have to go to get to Zion. You'd have to cross the river and go up that way.
Yeah.
In order to and you kind of go because the Grand Canyon's in the way.
Oh,
so
I see.
You have to go around. You either go around to the west or to the east.
Wow.
And so, or you can walk across the Grand Canyon if you want to do it that way. But you go northeast out of the Grand Canyon area through Monument Valley into southeastern Utah.
Okay.
Then you're in Canyonlands National Park territory. And of course, all of that stuff is amazing.
That Arches is right around there too, I think.
Arches is right next door.
Yeah.
Canyonlands.
Wow.
So that's usually where I take my students to see a good version of the Great Basin. If you consider the Four Corners desert area part of the Great Basin Desert, which some geographers and ecologists would quibble with me on that, that's the way I'm going to do it. Then it turns out that the Four Corners area is the most diverse part of the Great Basin Desert. There's all these little nooks and crannies in the canyons that have unique species found nowhere else. And so especially for plant endemism, for plants found nowhere else, the Four Corners Canyonlands country is where the Great Basin Desert reaches its, most diverse plants. And it turns out most of the animals of the Great Basin are found like in the central part of Nevada, places like that. There are unique animals to the Great Basin. So it's like this weird desert where the center of diversity for the plants is in a different place from the center of diversity for the animals, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of schizophrenic in that way.
That is weird. And
again, it just makes it kind of more interesting. And when you think, it's like, wait, why would that be? So lets you ask more questions. But yeah, if you want to see the Great Basin and a lot of scenery, you'll still see plenty of animals. I'm not saying it doesn't have any unique animals. It's got some, just not as many as some of the other parts of the Great Basin Desert. And the Canyonlands are the place to go.
Okay, I got that on my list here. All right, so we're in the Canyonlands. I'm gonna hit up Arches while I'm around here. So
yeah, definitely check. You got to see the Arches. I want to plug one little cool thing that I've got in my book that everybody's going to want to read, because there's the Arches. Since you brought it up, I didn't bring it up. The Arches. There's this incredible arch in Arches National Park. It's my favorite, called Landscape Arch. And in 1991, tourists were there when Landscape Arch almost completely collapsed and became even skinnier. And there's this arch at Arches National Park that is called Delicate Arch, that is the most famous one. It's all on their license plates, you name it. And it's not as delicate as Landscape Arch. Landscape Arch is this enormous span that is like a thread. That's how thin it is. And it's going to collapse any time. And there were tourists there in 1991 that saw it almost completely collapse and become even skinnier. And somebody got video of this happening.
Wow.
And somebody took pictures. And I contacted some of the people who were there.
That's amazing.
And I got the story. And it's going to be in my book.
Cool.
And the pictures are going to be in my book.
Wow.
And wait for that. I've already written it. It's awesome. So look forward to that. But before we get off topic too much, you want to turn west.
Okay, wait, hold on. So we got, all right, before we decide where we want to go from here, I'm hitting up Arches. I'm checking it out. Black Ridge Canyon around there. I can go up to Dinosaur National Monument, which is great. I don't think that's a desert though. Where are
you
we
kinda
going from here? Are we going
go-
northwest or just straight west?
I would go west any way you can if you want to find the next desert. You're going to be in the Great Basin Desert and some kind of more upland, semi-desert stuff for a long time. Drive across Utah. You're heading to California. You're
Oh,
heading to the
great. We're going to
Mojave.
California way.
Head to the little desert that Californians are so proud of, and for good reason.
Yeah.
In many ways, the Mojave is kind of the classic American desert. It's been in
Yeah.
every movie you've ever seen. It's on the cover of U2's most famous album, The Joshua Tree.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the land of the Joshua Tree, the Mojave Desert. It's pretty much, you know, a classic American desert only found in the United States. You know, you could argue that the Great Basin Desert extends partially into Canada. That would be a tough argument to make. The Great Basin Desert is kind of truly American too, but the Chihuahuan is definitely not all American.
Right.
It's 3/4 Mexican. Sonoran Desert, same thing. But the Mojave is completely contained within the United States in California and kind of northwesternmost Arizona and southernmost Nevada. A very dry desert in most places, a lot of creosote, and it's got what makes it unique. What makes all these deserts that I've been talking about unique is their unique climate. Each one has a slightly different climate, which is why there's so many plants and animals restricted to it. And there's something we haven't talked about yet, but I can explain it in 2 seconds. So there's this basic gradient of climate from west to east, where the Mojave Desert gets most of its rainfall in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
The Sonoran Desert gets most of its rainfall in the winter and then in summer. So it's got 2 rain seasons of the Sonoran Desert, which is one of the reasons why it's so lush and why it can support big trees. The Chihuahuan Desert, where we are, gets most of its rain in the summer thunderstorms, and nowhere else.
Yeah.
Great Basin gets most of its precipitation during the winter as snow. And so each one has this unique kind of climatic complexion that gives it all of its unique attributes. And so the winter rain of the Mojave Desert is why you find so many plants and animals restricted to that one little spot where that climatic pattern prevails. And the Joshua Tree is the emblem of the Mojave. It's restricted to the Mojave. Many people, if you wanted to map the Mojave Desert, you just draw a boundary around where the Joshua Tree lives, and that's the boundary of the Mojave Desert.
All right. Well, there we go, man. Okay, so we're in the Mojave. We're seeing the smog from L.A. in the distance.
Well, the Mojave's so far away. It's just far enough away. It's great. There's mountain ranges between L.A. and the Mojave.
Oh yeah, that's right. There are. Yeah,
you can absolutely get to the Mojave in like 2.5 hours from LA.
There's that one stretch of road that is that literally, if you don't have a full tank, like you're done. You're completely done.
I was just about to say that.
Oh yeah,
go ahead. 2.5 hours away from you're 2.5 hours away from Los Angeles, and yet there are very few places in the U.S. where I've ever been where I felt like I could die because I ran out of gas.
Right.
And it's not just because all the weirdos who live out in little hovels in the desert, because they're out there too.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because it's super remote, and all the services you're expecting, because it's California, forget about it.
Yeah.
There's stretches of highway there that go on, and there are no services. And and I love that about the Mojave Desert, where we're talking about the place you should visit is Mohave National Preserve. It's not really a national park. It's this enormous protected area. National preserves are run by, the Department of Interior, the Park Services, but they're slightly different in, the amount of things you can do and the amount of services that are there from the Park Service. And so in many ways, the Mohave National Preserve is kind of cool because it's not a national park. I love the national parks, but you can't just drop your tent anywhere in a national park and drive off on some dirt road without expecting, the fuzz to come and hassle you. And these national preserves, it's a little bit like the Wild West. The roads are terrible, they're not taken care of, and it's wild, and there's no services, and the man is not going to come and arouse you from your tent in the middle of the night. The man is nowhere to be found. And in that way, it's kind of cool. I love it. So Mojave National Preserve, there's Joshua trees everywhere, beautiful. All the, from the lowest elevation stuff where you don't find any vegetation up to, 4,000 feet where of the foothills where there's just giant Joshua trees everywhere and nobody's around. It's just great. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, we need to take a quick commercial break, but we're still cruising right along here.
Yeah, we still got one stop left to make, and it might surprise you where we're going next.
Okay, cool. Can't wait. We'll see you right after the break. All right, everybody, we are back. We are packed up. We have just visited. Run us through the whole list real quick. Where have we gone so far? We started in New Orleans and went all the way across to the Chihuahuan Desert.
Chihuahuan Desert in West Texas and Mexico, Sonoran Desert in the Tucson area. We went up to the Grand Canyon because you can't miss that. Then we touched on the kind of southeasternmost tip of the Great Basin Desert in southeastern Utah. Took a direct western beeline over to the Mohave Desert, California. And, a lot of people, if you look at a lot of your textbooks, some of the older literature on the North American deserts, some of our listeners might be thinking, oh, well, they're done. There's 4 North American deserts and they're going home. But I'm afraid you got a wild place left to see if you really want to experience the North American deserts. And I'm here to reveal something that many ecologists, and my book will be the first to do this, are actually recognizing 5 North American deserts now, not 4.
So 5.
There's one left. And so you're in a good place. If you're in the Mojave Desert, California, you're in a good place. You're going to head south. You're going to go south, head due south, and you're gonna find the border.
You're gonna whip out the passport again.
Get that passport out, and you're gonna go all the way down the length of California. You're gonna cross the border. You're gonna keep going down the bottom of California, what we call Baja California.
Oh, Baja.
Which literally is more or less the bottom of California.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the Baja California geologically until recently was an island. It rifted off, part of Baja California rifted off Mexican mainland and was drifting because of the San Andreas Fault, that whole thing.
Oh, right.
Northwest, off by itself, a big set of islands, maybe for 5 million years, just off by itself, isolated, and only recently reconnected to the mainland, 1,000 miles northwest to California. And so it's probably been dry and very desert-like for a large portion of that time that it was in isolation. And so people have looked at the flora and fauna of the Baja Peninsula and said, hell no, because traditionally it's been considered part of the Sonoran Desert. Since the kind of the dude who defined the North American deserts back in 1942, Forrest Shreve. Forrest Shreve is the godfather of desert rats, and he defined these deserts basically based on the plant growth habits that live in these different deserts back in the 40s. And he said, look, there's places where there's giant tree yuccas. That's the Mojave Desert. Yeah. There's this cold desert with low shrubs, this Great Basin. There's the Chihuahuan Desert that mostly has a bunch of small agaves and some other shrubs like lechuguilla. That's the Chihuahuan. The Sonoran Desert's got tree cactus. So that's what we're going to call the Sonoran. And where do tree cacti grow? Southern Arizona and Baja California.
Oh, Baja.
Baja California has enormous tree cacti, among other things. It's got a tree cactus that's bigger than the saguaro, the largest cactus in the world, called the cardon. It's also got incredibly weird things like this tree called the bujum, which is just it's a relative of the ocotillo, which most of our listeners have heard of.
Oh yeah.
But it's even weirder. And if you thought ocotillos were weird, and if you love ocotillos because they're weird, you're going to love the bujum, because it's like a giant carrot that can be 70 feet tall, covered with spines, that can often grow in weird, twisty, twirly growth forms. It's unbelievable. It's like looking at an alien planet.
It's like a real national monument or something.
It's just bizarre. And it's more or less only found in Baja California. There's one small colony that managed to get to the coast of Sonora that grows in the desert across the Sea of Cortez.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting place. And, our modern understanding suggests that it's been there isolated, living on, and all the plants have been kind of evolving on their own for millions of years. And only recently has it become in close enough proximity to the rest of North America that there's been kind of these exchanges. Things have been moving. And so even the boojum, this crazy, bizarre, giant carrot tree, has recently migrated to the coast of Sonora, just one little spot. And that's just enough to have kind of mixed things together to where Forrest Shreve would have looked at that and said, oh, it's one big desert. But in fact, no, the Baja Peninsula desert probably should be considered its own thing. It's unique enough. And a lot of the, attributes of the Sonoran desert that people talk about, that it's got the most diverse growth forms of plants of any of the deserts. It's got tree cactus. It's got spiny leafless trees. It's got big bottle trees that have huge swollen bases. It's got the boojum, which grows nowhere else. They say these things are unique to the Sonoran desert. What they really mean is it's unique to the Baja desert. Because the Baja desert actually has that unique, span of growth habits of plants. The Sonoran desert in Arizona and Sonora really doesn't. It doesn't have as many. That's when you say that, you're really saying that about the Baja desert. It's got the unique stuff, and it turns out many of the plants and animals that live there aren't closely related to the ones that live in the Sonoran desert proper. The one that I'm calling the Sonoran desert, the one that's only in Arizona and in Sonora. Their closest relatives aren't across the Sea of Cortez. Their closest relatives, turn out, live in the Chihuahuan desert. Yeah.
Really?
So there's if you look at the history of it, what that suggests is that the deserts of North America, the hot deserts, probably had most of their history, most of their evolution in Mexico. During the ice ages, most of those plants and animals would have been pushed farther south and would have been living in central Mexico and that's where they were surviving, these kind of climate refugia. And then whenever the climate became dry in North America, when the ice sheets retreated back up to Canada, those plants and animals would have kind of migrated out north.
Yeah.
And they probably did so from climatic refugia in the Chihuahuan Desert and in the southern Sonora area. And it turns out that, Baja California, when it used to be positioned farther south, connected to the mainland before it rifted off and became an island, it was probably in pretty close proximity to the southern Chihuahuan Desert, rather than Sonora. And so there's this interesting pattern where Sonora and Arizona are kind of off on their own. In Chihuahua, the Chihuahuan Desert and the Baja Peninsula share a lot in common. And if your stuff in the Baja Peninsula is more closely related to the stuff in Chihuahua than it is to the Sonoran Desert, there's no way it's related to the Sonoran Desert.
Yeah.
So it's its own thing. It's definitely its own thing.
Interesting.
So it's our kind of modern genetic understanding of what's related to what that's kind of led to recognition of this Baja Peninsula as a unique place. And it really shouldn't be considered part of the Sonoran Desert.
Yeah, because the Sea of Cortez, or the Gulf of California, same thing, right? It's far enough away from everything, or it's large enough, right, to keep these two land masses far enough away from everything that things start changing. That even they might look similar, like the plants and animals, but they're actually, the biology of them are very, very different, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's it's kind of like that. And it's no knock on Forrest Shreve. He didn't have all of this evidence back in the 1940s. And so he did a really great job. In many cases, his definitions and his boundaries of the deserts have stood the test of time and have been reinforced by modern evidence, except in this one case. In this one case, I think the fact that there were giant tree cactus growing in both places, in many cases the same species in both areas. Organ pipe cactus grows in both the Baja Peninsula and the Sonoran Desert. There are some plants that they share in common, just like there are plants that the Sonoran Desert shares with the Chihuahuan Desert.
Yeah.
But actually, I crunched some numbers And it turns out that based on the evidence that I can gather, there's more species in common between the Sonoran Desert and the Mohave Desert than there are between the Sonoran Desert and the Baja Desert.
Wow. Interesting.
So by that
That
logic,
is weird, huh?
you could easily just take the Mohave Desert, which most people are familiar with, and have, it's been around since Florence Shreve defined it for nearly 100 years now. And you could just as easily pair it and say, no, that's just a subdivision of the Sonoran Desert.
Interesting. Huh.
So that's one of the cool things that, nobody's done like a huge analysis of this. That's the crazy thing. Nobody's just taken all the plants throughout the North American deserts and done a big, unbiased statistical analysis to see where the centers of origin, the centers of diversity are.
Wow. Yeah.
There's little pieces of information across many papers, people will do. They've done a comparison like that, but it was restricted to the southwestern U.S., didn't have any data from Mexico. Or there's a paper that did that, and it only looked at the hot deserts and didn't look at the Great Basin cold desert at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's all this piecemeal stuff, and I'm trying to wade through it all right now. And, I guess what you can expect from me next year will be a distillation of all of that information into something that our fans can read.
That'd be great. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, we are just about out of time, but before we head out, that's a really good, something for us to look forward to is you kind of bathing in all this information and turning it into something legible to where we can all read. Before we head out, is this going to be more of an academic book, or is it going to be more something for layman's like me that are really interested, like love nerding out on stuff like that?
Yeah, I think anything I've ever written, if a layperson can't read it, I've failed. Like that's that's what I want my niche to be, is to be able to write about stuff. In fact, there's all kinds of stuff in here to get you through. If it ever gets super technical, like, we might have gotten the weeds here with our conversation just now. A little bit too much, might have got too technical, but there's always going to be some, mention of a scrotum there to keep you going.
There you go.
There's going to be stories. There's desert lore.
Yeah.
I talk about the greatest rock and roll death of all time happened outside Joshua Tree National Park. That's in there.
Yeah.
So there's enough stuff like that, little stories about desert lore and my experiences in the desert, that hopefully, if you get my station wagon and go on this voyage with me, starting in New Orleans and heading west, you'll get through it and you'll come out with a pretty good understanding of our deserts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Great episode. Looking forward to the next Science Nights in the Morning. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to this episode of Science Nights in the Morning. Be sure and follow us on Patreon for exclusive gear and uncut episodes. Check out the latest science articles on our Facebook page and subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast listening app. You can also listen every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time at BigBenRadio.com. And if you got a question, we'll join the discussion. Hit the hotline at 432-217-1983 and record your message. We couldn't do this without you, and thank you so much for listening each and every week. That's Science Nights in the Morning with a K, and we'll see you next time.